sunrise. The road outside the service center looked like a green wall of steel. 84 tractors stood silent, engines off, blocking every gate. 5 days earlier, a single farmer had received a cold email, warranty revoked. What happened next wasn't just protest. It was a story about dignity, loyalty, and the power of a community that refused to stand alone. 5 days earlier, Caleb Turner stood in the doorway of his barn staring at his tractor like a man looking at an old friend who had suddenly fallen silent. The machine had been his lifeline for 6 years. A bright green John Deere 7 that had plowed every acre of his family's land. It carried the sweat of long summers, the dust of harvest seasons, and the quiet pride of a man who believed hard work would always be enough. But that morning, the engine coughed twice and died. Caleb climbed down slowly, wiping grease onto his jeans. "Come on, girl, not today," he murmured. He checked everything he knew how to check. Fuel, lines, filters, nothing. Finally, he opened his phone and called the dealership service desk. "John Deere service, how can I help you?" "My tractor just shut down midfield," Caleb said. "Still under warranty." There was a pause on the line. Then the woman's voice returned, colder than before. "I'm sorry, sir, according to our system. Your warranty has been voided." Caleb blinked. "What do you mean, voided?" "Unauthorized software access detected." Caleb felt the ground shift beneath him. He had never touched the tractor's software. And suddenly, the machine that fed his family had become an expensive piece of silent metal. Caleb drove the tractor slowly toward the dealership the next morning, the engine barely cooperating. The service center stood at the edge of town, like a polished fortress, glass windows, spotless equipment, rows of brand-new machines shining in the sun. Everything about the place said, "Trust us." Inside, the service manager barely looked up from his computer. "Name, Caleb Turner." The manager typed for a moment, then leaned back. "Yes, warranty revoked. System logs show unauthorized software diagnostics." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I didn't modify anything." The manager shrugged. "The tractor connected to third-party diagnostic equipment." "That was my mechanic checking an error code." "Well, that's considered unauthorized access." Caleb stared at him. "You're telling me a mechanic reading a code voids a $30,000 warranty?" "That's the policy." Silence filled the room. Outside, farmers walked past the windows talking about harvest forecasts and rain patterns. Life moved on, but Caleb felt something heavy settle in his chest. "How much to fix it?" he asked quietly. The manager glanced at the screen again. Estimated repair, $18,400. The number hung in the air like a thundercloud. Caleb swallowed hard. For a farmer in the middle of harvest season, it wasn't just a bill. It was a disaster. That evening, Caleb sat at the wooden kitchen table long after dinner. His wife, Maria, watched him quietly. "You're doing that thing again," she said softly. "What thing?" "The stare at nothing thing." He sighed and rubbed his eyes. "They've voided the warranty." Maria froze. "What?" "They say the mechanic's scanner counted as unauthorized access." She leaned back slowly, disbelief written across her face. "That tractor cost more than this house." "I know, and they won't fix it." $18,000. Silence filled the room. In the next room, their 8-year-old daughter Lily was laughing at something on television. The sound made the moment even heavier. Maria finally reached across the table and squeezed Caleb's hand. "You've helped half the farmers in this county," she said. "Someone will help you figure this out." Caleb nodded, but his mind was already spinning. Farms didn't wait. Harvest didn't pause for corporate policies. Tomorrow the fields would still need plowing. And without that tractor, Caleb knew something terrifying. His entire season, maybe his entire farm, was suddenly hanging by a thread. Word spread faster than Caleb expected. By the next afternoon, 3 pickup trucks had pulled into his driveway. Old farmers, neighbors, friends. Tom Alvarez climbed out first, carrying a thermos of coffee. "Heard about the warranty nonsense," he said. Caleb shrugged. "Policy, apparently." Tom spat into the dirt. "Policy's just a fancy word for someone not wanting to help." Another farmer, Daniel Brooks, walked slowly around the disabled tractor. "They're locking farmers out of their own machines," he muttered. Caleb frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel pulled out his phone and showed him an article. Farmers across the country were fighting the same thing. Software locks, warranty cancellations, machines that only the manufacturer could legally repair. Caleb read the headline twice. "This can't be real." Tom chuckled bitterly. "Oh, it's real." The men stood silently beside the tractor. Then Tom said something that changed everything. "What if you're not the only one they're doing this to?" Caleb looked up. Across the county, across the farms, how many other tractors were sitting silent in barns? And suddenly, this wasn't just Caleb's problem anymore. The meeting happened in Caleb's barn that night. No official invitations, just word of mouth. One by one, trucks pulled into the dirt driveway. Farmers arrived carrying folding chairs, coffee thermoses, and quiet frustration. By the time Caleb stepped onto a hay bale to speak, more than 30 people had gathered. He felt nervous. "I didn't ask you all here to complain," he began, "but something feels wrong." He told them everything. The email, the warranty cancellation, the repair quote. When he finished, the barn was silent. Then a voice spoke from the back. "They did the same thing to me." Another voice followed. "Me too." Hands started raising. Stories poured out. A farmer whose combine warranty disappeared. Another whose tractor software locked after a simple repair. By the end of the night, the room felt different. Less like a group of frustrated individuals. More like something stronger. Tom leaned toward Caleb and whispered one sentence. "What if we remind them who actually feeds this country?" Caleb looked around the barn, and for the first time in 5 days, he realized this story was just beginning. The morning after the meeting, Caleb woke before sunrise. For the first time in days, he didn't feel completely alone. Still, the weight of uncertainty pressed against his chest as he stepped outside. The field stretched endlessly in the early light, rows of crops waiting patiently for work that his broken tractor could no longer do. His phone buzzed. A message from Tom. "Coffee at the diner. 7 a.m. Bring ideas." When Caleb arrived, half the farmers from the barn meeting were already there. Their muddy boots lined the entrance like quiet proof of long lives spent working the land. Daniel spread a notebook across the table. "I counted 12 farmers here last night who had warranty problems," he said. 12. Tom leaned back in his chair. "That's not a coincidence." The waitress refilled coffee cups while the men spoke in low voices. "What are we supposed to do?" someone asked. Caleb stared into his coffee for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised even him. "We show them we're not just customers." Tom raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" Caleb looked around the table. "It means we remind them who keeps those tractors moving." The room grew quiet, and slowly, one by one, the farmers began to nod. Something had started, and none of them fully realized yet how big it would become. Over the next 2 days, conversations spread across the county like wind through wheat fields. Farmers talked at feed stores, at fuel pumps, across fences between neighboring farms. Everywhere Caleb went, someone had a story. A tractor locked by software, a repair bill that shouldn't exist, a warranty quietly revoked. By Wednesday afternoon, Caleb's phone had stopped feeling like a phone. It felt like a hotline. 32 farmers had called, then 40, then 50. Some were angry, some were tired, but all of them carried the same quiet frustration. That evening, Caleb sat in his truck outside the barn watching the sun dip behind the fields. Tom knocked on the window. "You look like a man thinking dangerous thoughts." Caleb smiled faintly. "I've been counting." "Counting what?" "Tractors." Tom crossed his arms. "And," Caleb looked out at the fading sky, "if everyone who called shows up." Tom leaned closer. "How many?" Caleb turned the notebook toward him. Tom's eyebrows rose slowly. 84. The number sat between them like a spark waiting for air. Thursday afternoon, Caleb drove past the dealership again. Rows of brand-new tractors stood gleaming under bright sunlight, perfect and untouched. A salesman outside waved politely. "Looking to upgrade?" Caleb forced a smile. "Just browsing." But his eyes were fixed on the service gate. the place where farmers came when machines failed, where trust was supposed to live. He imagined 84 tractors sitting there, engines silent, waiting, not angry, just present. Back at the barn that evening, the farmers gathered again. More trucks this time, more chairs, more stories. Daniel stood beside Caleb with the notebook. 68 confirmed, he said. Tom grinned. And the rest? Still deciding. Caleb rubbed his hands together slowly. This isn't about revenge, he said carefully. It's about respect. A quiet murmur spread through the barn. He continued. We're not blocking roads. We're not breaking anything. So what are we doing? Someone asked. Caleb looked around the room. We're showing up. Silence fell. Then Tom chuckled softly. That might scare them more than yelling. Friday morning arrived with cold air and gray clouds hanging low over the county. One by one, tractors rolled out of barns across miles of farmland. Old machines, new machines, some dusty, some shining, all driven by farmers who rarely asked for attention. Engines rumbled down quiet country roads. At a crossroads outside town, Tom waited in his tractor. He watched as 2 more machines joined him, then 4, then 10. Within minutes, the road looked like a slow-moving river of green and yellow metal. Tom spoke into the radio. You boys sure about this? A voice crackled back. Been sure for years. The convoy moved forward together. Drivers waved to passing trucks. Some people pulled over to watch. No shouting, no horns, just steady movement. Caleb led the line from the front. When the dealership building finally appeared in the distance, his heart pounded. He whispered to himself quietly, let's see if they notice now. Behind him, 83 tractors followed. At exactly 8:12 a.m., the first tractor rolled into the dealership entrance. Then another, then another. Employees inside the building looked up from their desks. Engines shut off one by one. The parking lot filled slowly, carefully, like pieces of a giant puzzle being placed exactly where they belonged. Within 20 minutes, 84 tractors surrounded the service entrance, not blocking emergency lanes, not damaging anything, just sitting, waiting. The dealership manager rushed outside, confusion written across his face. What is this? Caleb stepped down from his tractor. It's a conversation. The manager looked around at the endless row of machines. You can't block the service gate. Tom leaned against his tractor tire. We're farmers, he said calmly. We've been waiting at service gates for years. A few farmers chuckled quietly. The manager pulled out his phone, clearly rattled. Caleb spoke again, steady and calm. You revoked my warranty. He gestured to the tractors. And it turns out, I wasn't the only one. The wind moved softly across the lot. 84 silent tractors stood like witnesses. And for the first time, the company was finally listening. At first, the dealership employees believed the farmers would leave after an hour, maybe 2. But the tractors stayed. Engines silent, drivers patient. By mid-morning, people from town began slowing their cars as they passed the dealership. Some rolled down their windows. Others stepped out with phones raised, recording the strange and powerful sight. 84 tractors, parked in perfect lines, guarding the service gate. Inside the building, nervous conversations echoed down the hallways. Who organized this? Is this legal? What do we do? The service manager who had dismissed Caleb 5 days earlier now stood behind the glass doors, watching the farmers outside like a man studying an approaching storm. Outside, Caleb leaned against his tractor, arms folded. Tom walked over holding 2 cups of coffee. You nervous? Tom asked. Caleb exhaled slowly. A little. Tom handed him the cup. You shouldn't be. Caleb looked across the line of tractors. Farmers sat quietly in their seats. Some talked softly. Some simply watched the building. No shouting. No threats. Just presence. And that calm silence carried more weight than anger ever could. Across the parking lot, a local reporter stepped out of a news van, camera already rolling. Tom noticed first. Well, he said with a small smile, looks like the world's about to hear your story. The camera light blinked red as the reporter approached Caleb. Sir, Can you explain what's happening here today? Caleb glanced around at the tractors before answering. This isn't a protest, he said calmly. It's a conversation that's been waiting to happen. The reporter tilted her head slightly. 84 tractors seems like a loud way to start a conversation. Caleb smiled faintly. We tried quiet. Behind him, Tom chuckled. The reporter continued filming as farmers nearby nodded. What exactly are you asking for? She asked. Caleb looked directly into the camera. Fairness. The word hung in the air. My tractor's warranty was revoked because a mechanic checked an error code, he explained. That tractor feeds my family. He gestured toward the long line of machines. And it turns out, I'm not the only one this has happened to. The reporter slowly panned her camera across the parking lot. Old farmers, young farmers, women and men who had spent their lives in fields and barns. Every face carried the same quiet determination. Back inside the dealership, employees watched the interview on the office television. And suddenly the story felt much bigger than this single broken tractor. By noon, the story had spread far beyond the county. Videos of the tractor blockade appeared online. News outlets began calling. Radio stations asked for interviews. People across the country watched the footage of 84 silent tractors standing outside a service gate. But for the farmers sitting in those seats, the moment felt deeply personal. Daniel Brooks leaned against his tractor tire, staring at the ground. Caleb walked over. You okay? He asked. Daniel nodded slowly. My dad bought this tractor before he passed, he said quietly. Caleb didn't interrupt. Daniel continued. When it broke last year, the dealership said the warranty didn't apply anymore. What did you do? Daniel shrugged. Took out a loan. The words landed heavily. Still paying it off, he added. Nearby, another farmer overheard. They did the same to my combine, he said. Soon the stories began flowing again, each one different, each one carrying its own weight. Medical bills, loans, families trying to survive another season. Caleb listened carefully, and he realized something important. This moment wasn't about machines. It was about dignity. Inside the dealership, tension had reached a breaking point. Corporate representatives were now on the phone with the regional manager. What exactly is happening there? A voice demanded through the speaker. The manager looked out the window again. They're just sitting. What do you mean sitting? They parked their tractors and turned off the engines. A long pause followed. Call the police. The manager hesitated. They're not breaking any laws. Another silence. Outside, the farmers waited patiently. Some shared sandwiches. Others poured coffee from thermoses. Caleb watched a young farmer helping an older man adjust a blanket across his lap. Small gestures. Quiet kindness. Tom stepped beside Caleb again. You know what scares them most? He asked. What? Tom nodded toward the building. That we're calm. Caleb thought about that. Anger would have been easier. Anger could be dismissed. But patience. Patience forced people to listen. The dealership doors finally opened. The service manager stepped outside, looking noticeably less confident than he had 5 days earlier. He walked slowly toward Caleb. I think we should talk. The conversation happened on the hood of Caleb's tractor. No offices. No desks. Just two men sitting across from each other under a gray sky. The service manager cleared his throat. This situation has gotten complicated. Caleb said nothing. The manager continued. Corporate is reviewing the warranty policy. Tom whispered from nearby. Translation, they're nervous. Caleb ignored the comment and focused on the man in front of him. All we want is fairness, Caleb said quietly. The manager looked across the parking lot again. 84 tractors. 84 farmers. Waiting. This many people showing up send a message, he admitted. Caleb nodded. That was the idea. The manager sighed. Give us a day. Caleb considered the request carefully. Then he looked around at the farmers who had come not just for him, but for each other. We've waited years, Caleb said calmly. One more day won't hurt. The manager stood up slowly. As he walked back toward the building, Tom leaned closer. You think they'll actually fix it? Caleb watched the glass doors close. I think, he said softly, They finally realized we're not standing alone anymore. The tractors stayed where they were. Hour after hour, the farmers didn't shout or argue. They simply remained present, like guardians of a quiet truth that had finally surfaced. By late afternoon, a black SUV pulled into the dealership parking lot. Everyone noticed. A man in a pressed suit stepped out, followed by two others carrying briefcases. They moved quickly toward the building while glancing at the sea of tractors surrounding them. Tom leaned toward Caleb. "Corporate," he muttered. Inside the dealership, the doors closed and the conversations began. Outside, life moved slowly. Farmers shared sandwiches. Someone passed around homemade pie. A few men laughed about old harvest stories, the kind told when long days finally allowed a moment of rest. Caleb sat on the tire of his tractor, watching the building. Maria called him from home. "You're all over the news," she said softly. He chuckled nervously. "I didn't plan for that." "You did the right thing," she replied. Caleb looked across the lot again. 84 tractors. 84 lives connected by something simple: fairness. For the first time since the warranty email arrived, Caleb felt something shift inside him. Not anger, not fear, just quiet strength. Inside the dealership, the meeting stretched for hours. Corporate representatives studied documents and repair logs. They watched the news clips playing across phones and tablets. Outside the window, the tractors hadn't moved. Not one. Finally, late in the afternoon, the dealership doors opened again. The suited man stepped outside, adjusting his jacket as he approached Caleb. He looked around slowly before speaking. "I'm David Harlow from Regional Operations." Caleb stood. "Caleb Turner." David nodded politely. "We understand there have been concerns." Tom whispered under his breath. "That's one way to say it." David continued carefully. "Our company values its customers, especially farmers." Caleb crossed his arms. "Then why do so many of us feel like we're locked out of our own machines?" The question hung heavily between them. David looked again at the line of tractors stretching across the lot. 84 silent reminders. "We're reviewing the warranty decision," he said finally. "And the others?" Caleb asked. David hesitated. Then he answered. "All of them." A ripple of quiet murmurs moved through the crowd. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was the first real step forward. Evening approached slowly as the farmers continued waiting. Some leaned against their tractors, watching the orange glow of sunset settle over the lot. Daniel stood beside Caleb. "You think they mean it?" he asked. Caleb shrugged. "I think they realize something today." "What's that?" Caleb looked across the rows of tractors again. That farmers talked to each other. A few minutes later, David returned with the dealership manager. Both men looked noticeably less tense than before. David cleared his throat. "We're reinstating Mr. Turner's warranty effective immediately." A small cheer rippled through the farmers. Caleb felt his shoulders drop slightly for the first time in days, but he didn't celebrate yet. "And the others?" he asked again. David nodded. "We'll review each case and restore warranties where policy was misapplied." Tom grinned. "That's a fancy way of saying you messed up." The suited man gave a tired smile. "Perhaps." The tractors remained silent, but something had changed. The quiet determination that brought 84 farmers together had done something powerful. It had been heard. As darkness began settling over the dealership parking lot, the farmers slowly climbed back into their tractors. Engines started one by one. The deep rumble of diesel engines filled the evening air like a long breath finally released. Tom leaned from his cab window. "Well, Caleb," he called out. "Not bad for a week's work." Caleb smiled. "Couldn't have done it alone." Daniel drove his tractor beside them. "None of us could." That was the truth of it. No single farmer had caused the change. It had taken 84. 84 people who refused to let one neighbor face a problem alone. The tractors began rolling slowly out of the lot, headlights cutting through the early night. People from town still stood along the sidewalks watching. Some clapped. Others simply nodded with quiet respect. As Caleb drove past the dealership sign, he glanced in the mirror. The building was growing smaller behind him, but the message they had delivered would stay much longer. When Caleb finally pulled his tractor back into the barn that night, the familiar smell of hay and soil wrapped around him like a memory. Maria and Lily were waiting by the door. Lily ran straight into his arms. "Daddy, you were on TV." Caleb laughed softly and hugged her tight. Maria stepped closer and rested her hand on his shoulder. "You did something important today," she said. Caleb looked back toward the quiet fields beyond the barn doors. "I didn't," he replied. "We did." He thought about the long line of tractors that had stood together outside the dealership that morning. Different farms, different families, but the same simple belief. That fairness matters, that dignity matters, and that when people stand together with calm determination, even the biggest companies have to listen. Sometimes the most powerful protest isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a group of neighbors refusing to leave each other behind. Sometimes courage doesn't shout. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the form of neighbors standing side by side. 84 tractors didn't just block a gate. They reminded the world that unity is stronger than silence. If this story touched your heart, subscribe, like, and join our Heart Angels family.